Oscar, bravo. Let me say what an honour it is to be invited by Street Level Gallery to speak about the Marzaroli archive and to try and frame Oscar and his work in the pantheon of Glasgow photography. Now, under normal circumstances, I was meant to be giving this talk at the Clydeside Distillery, but these aren't normal circumstances. We're under lockdown. I'm sitting in my spare room cum study in an eerily quiet Glasgow. But one of the things that means is that I can enjoy a wee dram while I'm speaking to you. So wherever you are, pour yourself a drop of your favourite poison, sit back, we're going to the pictures. Being invited to speak about Oscar also comes as something as a surprise because I'm not a photographer. I can't talk about the technicalities, f-stops, shutter speeds, focal planes and all that gubbins. All I can talk about are the images, their warmth, their humanity, and what they evoke not only in me, but in anyone with an eye for brilliant imagery. Speaking of pictures, who remembers the days when Glasgow cinemas ran continuous screenings and you could come and go as you pleased, often seeing the end of a film before you'd seen the beginning of it, and then waiting in the luminous gloom until the point where you'd entered came round again before you got up and made your excuses and shuffled out your row back into the streets. Well, we all, depending on age, have different entry points into Oscar's pictures. Malcolm at the gallery thought it'd be good if you could see me as well as hear me. So here I am looking all arty-farty with a great backing band. Billy Connolly and Tam Harvey, cousin of Alex Harvey, the Humble Bums, and Matt McGinn of the Carlton. So as I say, we all have different entry points into Oscar's pictures. So sit back, dim the lights, dinna rustle your sweetie pokes, nae winching in the back row. Quiet now, the pictures are about to begin. Some of you may remember Oscar as the intense young handsome Glasgow Italian dreaming of making his mark in the world. And this picture, I should point out, wasn't taken by Oscar but by his wife Anne. She'd landed herself quite a catch. Some of you may remember him as the ambitious young filmmaker in his then trademark Astrakhan hat and coat. And if you've ever done any location filming in Scotland, there's an awful lot of hanging about. You've got to keep wrapped up warm. I'm pretty sure this is Oscar and his film cameraman Martin Singleton in 1971 directing a documentary called Glasgow 1980, a glimpse into the potential future of our city. His film editor on the project was a hairy young hippie called Bill Forsyth. I wonder whatever became of him. If you go onto YouTube, you can watch Glasgow 1980 to see how wide of the mark their future predictions for Glasgow were. What's also quite strange about going through the Marzaroli archive is how few pictures there are of Oscar. Much like my own family photographs, any time I go looking for a picture of my dad, he's notable by his absence. Why? Because he was always behind the camera, he was always taking the pictures. This is Oscar and Anne up at artist Joan Eardley's cottage in Catalan in Angus. And some of you may think of Oscar as the grand old man of Glasgow street photographer, only Oscar never got to be that grand old man. Snatched from us and his wife and 3 daughters, aged only 57. Having turned 54 this month, I now know that is no age at all, and I could weep for all that Oscar was yet to show us. All that potential, all those future photographs, gone in an instant. Now, this is where I came into the picture. It's 1984, and Oscar is staging his first retrospective exhibition at Suckyhall Street's old Third Eye Centre. I was only 18 at the time, and had never seen my city, our city, presented in such a magic and elegiac way. It was a genuine eye-opener for this wee Glasgow guy. Incidentally, it wasn't my first visit to the Third Eye Centre. Having an art teacher, Mum, I used to get dragged along to all sorts of exhibitions, and was at the Third Eye Centre the weekend that it opened. As an 8-year-old, that was quite a terrifying adventure. Not only was the place full of big hairy hippies, there was also a sort of, let's say, a slight odour about the building. My mum and dad assured me it was just the smell of damp. It was another, perhaps 10 years before I realised that half the folk there, including the staff, were all smoking joints, and what I was getting was the first whiff I'd ever have of hashish. Here's the brilliant poster for that first show, with Oscar's remarkable image of a man working on the construction of the Townhead interchange in Glasgow. He's turned the industrial into something almost biblical with that bolt of light, elevating a normal working man to the status of hero. Younger folk and a global audience got their first glimpse of Oscar's work when Deacon Blue began using his images on their LPs and single sleeves. Ricky Ross, then a young school teacher and aspiring musician, had been at that same exhibition in 1984. In fact, that's where he first met Oscar. And the exhibition was strange because it saw the usually avant-garde Third Eye Centre invaded by an army of wee Glasgow grannies and bunneted men, Gorbalites, Govenites, tune heeders. Not the usual audience for an art exhibition in Glasgow. But that speaks volumes about the accessible and democratic nature of Oscar's photography. It speaks to something deep within us all. These aren't strangers we're looking at. It's our grannies and grandpas, our mums and dads, our friends and neighbours. It's us. If you're even older, you might remember young Oscar and his parents' cafe, the original Grosvenor Cafe in Byers Road. These are the Zanato brothers behind the counter, whose family bought the cafe from Oscar's dad. Remarkably, Renzo Zanato on the left is still on the go, and now in his late 90s visited the street level exhibition just the other month. He remembers many a time chasing an absent-minded Oscar along Byers Road after the snapper had left his camera bag lying under one of the cafe tables. Now, Oscar wasn't the first photographer to try and frame and capture the spirit of our city. From the very invention of the camera, photographers were keen to capture Glasgow, both its bright spots and its dark and dingy corners. One of the most famous, of course, was Thomas Annan, who was commissioned by the Glasgow City Improvement Trust in the 1870s to photograph the absolutely appalling living conditions in the old wines, Vennels and closes off the high street before they were swept away for something a bit better. And they all came, the cream of British and European documentary photographers. In the 1940s, the famous photographer Bert Hardy was sent north for Picture Post, a title which Oscar later photographed for. He was again working down in the Gorbals, showing the grim daily life and reality for so many, but there's also these lovely bright sparks of humanity. These two wonderful wee lads with their grubby knees and grubby faces, they just speak Glasgow. The brilliant thing about this photograph is that some 30 years after it was taken, the wee lad on the left recognised his younger self. That's a young George Davis, and even remembered his old school chum's name, Leslie Mason. Now, putting names to these two boys might not mean much to you, but before we had names for these boys, it was what I call an orphan image. A wonderful picture, sure, but who were these guys? Putting names to them brings them home, brings the picture to life, and it also brings these boys back to life because they're long gone. In the 1950s, it was the photographer Roger Main who was sent north. He was photographing the start of the destruction of the old Townhead, once one of the real close-knit communities of Glasgow, probably the oldest community in Glasgow. I think that wee fella at the front lost his marble down the stank. Look at him, bahookie up in the air. Another photographer, Joseph Mackenzie, put together this wonderful book, Gorbals Children, in the 1960s. What you see in the background, the wee laddie way up the fence, that's the Venny, Glasgow's first adventure playground, and that was the brainchild of Matt McGinn, who was a school teacher at the time, but he realised that the city kids needed somewhere to let off steam. McGinn was famously quoted in the Glasgow Herald at the opening of the Venny as saying, "My job here's not to tell the Waynes to do this or to do that, it's to help them do what they want to do. My other, more important, if unofficial job, is to give them lights for their fags." Well, you can imagine how well that went down with the powers that be. Local lad David Peat, a friend of Oscar, he used his camera in the 1960s to tour the city, taking wonderful pictures. His aim was to get into film school, which he succeeded in doing, and ended up becoming one of Britain's foremost documentary filmmakers. His old pal Oscar must have been very, very proud of him. In the 1970s, it was Nick Hedges, and he was touring the whole of Britain for the housing charity Shelter, looking at the grim living conditions for so many in Britain. We think of the 70s as an era of new towns, new kitchens, new bathrooms, but for an awful lot of folk in Glasgow, it was old grim closes, damp flats, multiple occupancy, broken windows and stair-head lavies still. Mind you, at least they made it over to Govan to take this wonderful image of childhood, that sense of freedom in that wee girl's face, with the cranes and the sun behind her. It's just a magic picture of childhood. Hugh Hood, who was then a student at the College of Building and Printing in Glasgow, he took a wonderful series of pictures of the city in 1974. I love this wee guy swinging in the chain of an awning somewhere down in the Salt Market. Some of Hugh Hood's pictures are automatically recognisable. Others you look at them and they look so strange and otherworldly because the parts of the city you're looking at have long been swept away. Another photographer who was working very much at the same time as Oscar is Morton Gillespie, an old friend of Lost Glasgow. I'm always amazed actually that Morton and Oscar never photographed each other, never caught each other in the corner of a frame, because they were both pounding the same streets pretty well the same time, both lost in their thoughts, each trying to condense Glasgow life into a single frame. Now, before the lockdown, we should all have been up at Maryhill Borough Halls to see Morton's first exhibition of his Glasgow photography. In fact, the opening was due to happen the weekend that the lockdown was announced, so the exhibition is still hanging up at the Maryhill Borough Halls, and once this is all over, get yourself up there because Morton's work is absolutely superb. Raymond Depardon, the famous French photojournalist, he was sent north for the Sunday Times magazine in 1980 to photograph two sides of Glasgow, the old working class areas of Glasgow, in the East End and down in Govan where this photograph was taken, but also to photograph the bold new Thatcherite Glasgow, because that's what the Sunday Times wanted to see, the two sides of the city. Now, the trouble was, when Depardon went into the posher parts of Glasgow, nobody wanted to get their photograph taken by this foreign photographer. Away you go, pal, I didn't want to be photographed. More's the point, there was no kids in the street. All the kids in the posh parts of Glasgow were all playing in their big hoosies or out in their back gardens. And poor old Raymond, he walked the streets and he just had nothing to photograph. But when he went into Govan, when he went down to the East End, he found warmth, humanity and a welcome, and kids that were desperate to get their photos taken by this funny foreign man. Needless to say, when Depardon took all his pictures back to the Sunday Times, they took one look at them and thought, this isn't really what we commissioned. And sadly his pictures were all spiked, the whole project was spiked. And Raymond only brought his pictures back to light about 10 years ago. And again, they're a fascinating glimpse. And even though it's only 1980, some of the pictures look as if they could have been taken in the 40s or the 50s. But as I say, a lot of these photographers were outsiders and paid assignment, paying a flying visit to our human zoo. Oscar was an inmate of the Glasgow Zoo, working in his own time, usually unpaid, to capture and memorialise his city and his fellow citizens for posterity. When Italy entered World War II and Winston Churchill issued his famous order on resident Italians, collar the lot, certain Glaswegians began attacking the city's Italian cafes. Up in Maryhill, when a mob went after the Blythswood Cafe, the locals came to their rescue, forming a human wall around the building. When one of the big thugs stood forward and threatened to put a brick through the cafe window, the largest of the Maryhill boys stood forward and stood in front of him and said, "Aye, they might be tallies, but they're our bloody tallies." Well, Oscar was surely our bloody tally. He was one of us, one of that happy breed, the Scosia Italia clan, who have brought so much joy, new flavours, ice cream, fish and chips, pizza, pasta, and a hint of Mediterranean magic and warmth into grey old Glasgow. You see, Oscar never looked down on us. Sometimes he looked up to us, but mostly, as a fellow Glaswegian, he met our gaze head on, shared a word or a joke, raised a smile, and in that split second pressed the shutter and captured an image for posterity. Sometimes he met us all head on, and these aren't strangers in the Celtic end at Hampden for a Scottish Cup final. Amongst that magic sea of Glasgow faces is a face that I knew. Former Carlton lad and international brigadier James Maley. He's hiding over there, just keeking out on the right of the picture. I knew Mr. Maley in his latter years, and his story is incredible. Captured at the Battle of Jarama, his family thought he was dead until they spotted him in a cinema newsreel. His poor old mammy chased the newsreel from the Carlton to Paisley, where the projectionist kindly cut a frame from the film for her to put in her purse. James made it home safe from Spain as part of a prisoner swap and eventually died in Glasgow aged 99. I bumped into one of his sons, my old mate Professor Willie Maley, at the exhibition opening, and well, when you meet an old comrade, you salute them. And Oscar, sometimes like a war photographer, had to work under incoming fire. Don McCullen would have been proud of that image, with the bricks and the bottles thrown. But these wee tykes had a softer side, and sometimes kicked off their sannies and welly boots for something more sophisticated, their mother's good high heels. Sometimes Oscar worked under the harshest of critics. This is the famous Mrs. Gallagher of Florence Street, the original neighbourhood watch. Nothing went on in the Gorbals that she didn't keep a beady on. And looking at this picture, I was reminded of another great Glasgow artist, the cartoonist Bud Neal, the inventor of Lobby Dosser. Here's Mrs. Thompson officially opening the Toonheed window hanging season. Because that's the great thing. Oscar and Bud worked with the same material, the human clay of Glasgow. I spoke earlier of the honour I feel about being invited to speak about Oscar's work, and when Street Level first sent me a download of all the low-res images to put this talk together, I felt as though I'd been handed the crown jewels of Glasgow, because I know just how precious these pictures are to all of us. They're part of us. Now, Oscar first came to photography in his late teens. Confined to a sanatorium in Kingussie for a year with a recurrence of his childhood tuberculosis. Having experienced a similar near-death experience in my late 20s, when, how should I put it, an internal plumbing problem saw me drop from 13 stone to just 5.5 stone in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. I know how that sort of experience focuses the mind, makes you want to grab life by the lapels. So that's what Oscar did. While confined in Kingussie, he read voraciously, working his way through all the European classics, wanting every day of his life to count. He developed a love for and a knowledge of world art, and once he recovered and came back to Glasgow, he began to turn his eye on his own native Garnet Hill, where he'd grown up. These are the wains of Hill Street, off to school in the morning, and I think somebody's telling that shaggy dog that he can't come with them, that he's got to go home. But Oscar also noticed the miracle in the Gorbals, the biggest development site in Europe. The real miracle, of course, is that there's anything of it still remaining standing. And beyond that, he noticed the miracle that is Mother Glasgow, this mongrel city on the far western tip of Europe that we all call home. And he worked in all weathers. This was just a wee shower for Oscar. He'd have been glad of his Astrakhan hat and coat that day. And he didn't care what folks said about his work. Let the gossips gossip. I might be mistaken, but I'm quite sure that's one of Bud Neal's wee wifeys standing speaking there. They weren't caricatures, they were drawn from life. And if he needed some sustenance in his wanders around the Gorbals, he could always grab a pint of milk, of course. Because Oscar was a master of catching the magic light in Glasgow. Waiting for the magic, that's what he used to call it when he was waiting to take a picture. And he perfectly captured that crepuscular, luminous northern gloom that makes our city so unique and at times so beautiful. Who else but Oscar could turn the mills in the River Kelvin into the campaniles of a Tuscan hill town, the bridges of the River Clyde into a scene from Florence. Is that the Ponte Vecchio I'm seeing there? The Kelvin Grove Museum into one of King Ludwig's Bavarian fantasies. Central Station into our own Grand Central Station. What's rather shaming for Glasgow is that until the current exhibition at street level, the only permanent displays of Oscar work were in two city pubs, Babbitty Bousters and the Heel and Jessie. That's Oscar sitting on the left with filmmaker Charlie Gormley in the Heel and Jessie and the Gallagate. And that's why it's so important that the archive, some 50,000 images, including rolls of films that have never been developed, are now in the safe hands of Glasgow Caledonian University, my alma mater, although back then it was still just the plain old Glasgow Tech. I thank the Marzaroli family for that gift to Glasgow. Grazie mille. It's not just a gift to Glasgow, it's a gift to us, and I wonder what other magic we will find amongst those images. Because Oscar knew everyone. He knew Hugh McDermott. We know, of course, that he knew Matt McGinn. He also knew Joan Eardley and her regular sitters, the wonderful skelly-eyed, snottery-nosed Samson Wains of Toonheed. And as the proud father of 3 daughters, he knew never to get in the way of a Glasgow girl. And he knew our Alistair, grey of that ilk. There is something inexplicably right that the first exhibition from Oscar's archive should share a building with Alistair's final exhibition. 2 old cronies reunited in the Trongate, in the heart of the city they loved and shared. Back in 1984, when I first met Oscar, I'd also just met Alistair and had just started reading Lanark. Aged 18, I didn't get half of it. Now older, and hopefully a little wiser, I've started reading it again. This passage from the book has always stayed with me. Glasgow is a magnificent city, said McAlpin. Why do we hardly ever notice that? Because nobody imagines living here. Think of Florence, Paris, London, New York. Nobody visiting them for the first time as a stranger because he's already visited them in paintings, novels, history books and films. But if a city hasn't been used by an artist, not even the inhabitants live there imaginatively. Well, Alistair and Oscar opened my eyes to the magnificence of our city, gave me a magical Glasgow of the imagination to live in, work in, love in and explore. And for that, and for so much more, I say, Oscar, bravo. Now, we're back at the bit of the picture where I first came in, so if you'll excuse me, I'll take my leave and head out back onto the streets of Glasgow.
Thanks to everyone for joining. Now, Norry, you're a journalist by trade. You used to be at the Herald and the Evening Times, I do believe, yes. Journalist. But your role as a social historian has really come to the fore through the marvellous resource that is Lost Glasgow, which is a site and a social media archive which shares old photos capturing the ever-changing face of Glasgow and its community. in that sense, it's highly appropriate to be undertaking this presentation tonight in relation to the Oscar Marzaroli exhibition, which is still up on the walls at street level. And when we do reopen, we will run the exhibition for a bit longer. We stay tuned. We don't know when that will be. But just tell us a little bit more briefly about Lost Glasgow, how that came about.
It's a strange one. In the 14 years that I was at the Herald and Evening Times, literally within the first couple of weeks, the chap who had traditionally done what was called the memories page, which was digging out old pictures from the Herald and Evening Times archive, he left and I got handed it. And it was a bit like being handed to the goose that lays the golden eggs, because I was like the proverbial pig in the proverbial. I had full run of the Glasgow Herald Picture Archive, and I've always been fascinated with Glasgow. I can't imagine, if I'd been born in Manchester, I'd be fascinated with Manchester. If I'd been born in London, I'd be fascinated with London. But I was lucky enough and blessed to be born in Glasgow, and Glasgow's got such a unique history. I just find it endlessly fascinating. So for 14 years, I wrote the daily memories page in the Evening Times. I'm gonna spat the gummy at the Herald about 5 years ago. I knew I needed to be writing every day, and I'd stumbled across a site called Lost Edinburgh, which was rather wonderful. And then suddenly I found a site called Lost Glasgow, which I actually thought was pretty rubbish. They were throwing the pictures away with no story, no context, no sort of human element. It was just a picture saying George Square, 1965. So one night, after a couple of glasses of the red stuff, I messaged the Lost Glasgow site and said, you should be doing this more like Lost Edinburgh, and woke up the next day with a bit of a sore head and a message from the team at Lost Glasgow to say, we are actually Lost Edinburgh, but we don't know Glasgow that well. Do you want to take it on? And that's to say about 5.5 years ago, and at that point, I think there was only 7,000 followers, and we're now up to about 170,000 followers, and that's just on Facebook without Twitter and all the rest of it, and the Lost Glasgow closed group. So it's a hobby that's grown arms and legs, and has led to all sorts of interesting opportunities, should I say, as in tonight's talk.
Okay. So I'm glad when you say you're not a photographer, because I think talking about f-stops and shutter speeds would be a much less interesting thing to do. But that's about the mechanics of photography, the apparatus. But Lost Glasgow is really all about photography, isn't it? It's images, it's photography.
It couldn't exist without images.
Yeah.
And so often, particularly when I'm sort of dragging newspaper archives, sadly, they don't mention who took the photograph, which I think is a real shame. I mean, I'm having worked my entire professional life with photographers. The thing is, you always credit the bloody photographer because their work is as important as anything. And so often, as I talked in the film about the orphaned image and the Bert Hardy picture, it's so important to tie pictures to photographers, because that way you can trace back and try and explore more of their archive. And if they took more Glasgow photographs and try and hunt them down, it's often, I see myself sometimes as a bit like the raider of the lost archives. And it's brilliant when you can link photographs to specific photographers at specific times and try and work out where they were in their lives when they visited Glasgow and when they took certain photographs.
Yeah. It's interesting that you, I mean, photographs are really our windows to the past. I mean, I think that's an obvious thing to say, but they're kind of historical evidence of social, cultural, and political practices in that way. So we kind of look at images of the past, I would say, in order to gain a better understanding of where we are in the present. I mean, your narrative around about Oscar's work was really, really passionate and really quite moving.
Because I find this photography deeply moving. As I say, it's not strangers we're looking at. It's our grandparents, it's our mums and dads, it's our neighbours, our friends in the family. It's technically it's us we're looking at in a different age.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. I mean, you speak about photography being a record of historical truth, but it's also a sort of fictionalized historical truth, because the important thing to remember is for all that was photographed, there's an awful lot that wasn't photographed. And why wasn't it photographed? Particularly the Annan images. Having read a fair bit about Annan talks in depth about the technicalities of trying to take pretty primitive photographs in pretty dark and dingy places. But he very rarely ever mentions the subjects that he was photographing. There was that disconnect. He was there on assignment, and his concern was getting the good photograph. His concern wasn't really what these people were living through, which I find very strange. Whereas the more I've read interviews with Oscar is very concerned with the people that he's photographing, because he's part of that community. It's his fellow citizens that he's photographing, and he is very aware of that.
Yeah, that's true. And you say that Oscar's very much a part of Glasgow and its image of itself. There's very few other photographers who have done that. We could mention another great Scottish photographer, Joseph Mackenzie, of course, who based in Dundee. And in actual fact, his exhibition, A Love Letter to Dundee, should have been on right at this moment, just prior to lockdown. And I think you were going up to visit.
I was planning a visit up. I spent the first 13 years of my working life in Dundee working for DC Thomson. Started off in teenage magazines, Blue Jeans and Jackie and all the rest of it, which is when I first got to actually work with photographers. So Dundee has a very soft spot in my heart. Unfortunately, before he died, I met Mackenzie a couple of times. He was the head of photography at Duncan of Jordanson. And was a fascinating guy, and his Dundee photography, just as Marzaroli captures a vanishing Glasgow, Mackenzie captured a wonderful period of vanishing Dundee, when medieval bits of Dundee were coming down. We think Glasgow is the only city that's basically self-destructed in the last 30, 40 years, but Dundee did it to itself as well, destroying the wonderful architecture and geography around its city churches and the old Hawk Hill, which Mackenzie photographed so brilliantly.
Yeah, that's right. So on the subject of where we are at the moment, so we're in lockdown in this very strange situation. So we've done a couple of live streams, and it's an odd experience sitting here knowing that there's hundreds of other people watching this at exactly the same time. That is quite exhilarating. It's almost like the live event. Well, it is live.
Yeah.
Except we're not gathered together in the one space. But that raises the question, the cynics amongst us might say, well, why have exhibitions at all if we can just do it this way? And what do you think of that?
I think the shared experience is all part of the experience. I wouldn't know you if I hadn't bumped into you at various things. Half the fun of the Oscar Marzaroli exhibition, God knows how many times I went in to see it. And a few times I basically just sat in a seat and read a book. I listened to other visitors' conversations, strangers making connections, recognising people in the pictures. And the conversations that went on were priceless, because they all add to the story of the pictures. It's that first-hand experience that, unless you get it first-hand, you'll never get it. It's like trying to catch will-o'-the-wisp. It's personal memory, it's family stories that come out that spark the pictures spark. And that is priceless. I know from my own experience, a couple of years ago, I ran a Lost Glasgow exhibition at the Glasgow City Heritage Trust. and I wasn't sure if anyone would come. And over the course of, I think, 6 or 8 weeks, they get 5,500 people through the doors. The poor staff at the Glasgow City Heritage Trust, I don't think got a stroke of work done for about 6 weeks. There's this constant tribe of folk coming through the doors, asking them questions about the photographs.
Yeah.
And again, the brilliant thing is we get folk that recognised themselves or recognised family members in the photographs. And again, these orphaned images, all of a sudden we could put names to faces, which is wonderful.
Yeah. It was an interesting exhibition because it wasn't the standard exhibition that you would expect to view photographs of the past through. So they weren't in frames static on the wall. These were all mounted and presented on shelves, and people could make their own arrangements. So it was quite interactive, I thought. It had a nice contemporary feel to it.
It's the way that people handle their own photographs. They pick them up and they show them to each other and they pass them around. And almost every time I went into the exhibition, it was like a different exhibition because folk had rearranged the pictures all around the walls. After its outing at the Glasgow City Heritage Trust, I think it's since then had, doing my sums now, I think three following outings: Mary Hill Borough Halls, the Arlington Baths Club, and the Tenement House. And each time that it was up in a different order, and almost it's got its own story now, which is wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can take some questions if anyone would like to pose one by typing it in through the comment section on Facebook here. Any volunteers for that? Any questions for Norry or about the presentation? And I'm just keeping an eye on Facebook at the same time here. So I'm looking at two different devices. So
always silence.
Which is very much a surprise. As someone mentioned earlier on, Margaret Watkins and her photographs of Glasgow, which I thought, oh yeah, of course, and the long time ago, Margaret Watkins was photographing aspects of Glasgow, so that's one to probably revisit and bring back to
definitely
awareness a bit more.
Her story is remarkable as well.
Yeah,
from being the first commercial photographer on Madison Avenue in New York to basically slightly blotting her copybook over an affair with one of her married bosses, and having to hightail it out of New York and ending up back in Glasgow with, I think, a couple of maiden aunts, and then leaving her entire archive to Joe Mulhern, who didn't even know that she'd been a photographer. Basically left him a huge sea chest, and when he opened it, here's this incredible archive, not just of Glasgow photography, but of New York, revolutionary Russia, Weimar Germany. I mean, just a spectacular collection, and also the fact that she was a female operating in what is usually considered a male domain, yet there's so many absolutely superb female photographers who have almost vanished from history. And I do think that a female eye sees different things to a male eye, not just in photography, but in life and love and everything. Women notice different things. You vive la différence. Growing up, as I say, my mother was a Glasgow art teacher, and the brilliant thing that she did, just as children have to learn how to read and write, we also have to learn to read visually. And my mother was brilliant at that, because even though she was dragging me along to Kelvin Grove and exhibition openings, she would never tell me what she saw in a picture. She would always first ask me, what do you see? And that learning how to read visual imagery, I think, is almost as important as learning how to read words.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you see different things. And I learnt that very much in newspaper days as well, where you wouldn't just look at a photograph head on, you would turn it on its side, you would turn it upside down, you would look at it every which way before you decided that this was good and there wasn't something creeping into the picture. We once famously, and I think it was Celtic or Rangers winning the league, we used a banner picture right across the front of the Evening Times to celebrate their league win. And it was only about 5 minutes after we went to press, somebody in the sports desk came charging over and went, "Have you seen what that guy's got in his hand?" And there was a guy right in the centre of the picture who, rather than waving his flag, was waving like about a 4 foot long pink dildo. And we very quickly had to change the picture for second edition. But it was simply that no one had looked closely enough at what was actually happening in the picture.
Yeah.
Spot this large pink obscenity on the front page of the Evening Times.
Okay. So there's a couple of questions coming in here, a couple of related ones. Becca Hepworth, who's Marie Claire Marzaroli's daughter, so the granddaughter of Oscar. She wanted to know, do you have a favourite photograph? And Louise Murphy is asking the same. It's a killer of a question, that one, isn't it?
It's a killer of a question, and I would answer it by saying the favourite photograph is always the next one. It's always the next one. As I say, the archive is so vast, and the fact that there's still rolls of films to be developed, I can't wait to see what's coming next and what we'll see.
Yeah, there was a question there. Any idea when we will know what's on Oscar's undeveloped rolls? Well, we can't answer that directly yet, but certainly we will look into getting them developed, and very interesting to see. Another question is from Norry to Norry. So Norry Bissell, the author and the writer, who's writing to us from Lung. Where did you research the other photographers?
A mixture of places. I mean, most of them I've known their work for years, simply through my Lost Glasgow sort of researches. But as I say, the incredible thing is there's always folk coming out the woodwork. Just in the past few months, a wonderful photographer called Josh Treen, and another one called Peter Degnan, who photographed Glasgow in the 1970s, have started putting their work up. And I was completely unaware of them, as I think most folk were. But it's that there's so many good Glasgow photographers who were working in the past 20, 30 years. And as I say, the remarkable thing about Oscar is most folk that don't know anything about photography would assume that Oscar was out on assignment, getting paid to take these pictures of Glasgow. He wasn't. He was doing this all in his downtime. It was his own passion project. And he did it for no money. He did it for the love of taking photographs of Glasgow. And so many other photographers were doing the same, either inspired by Oscar or previous Glasgow photographers. Because there's professional photographers, but quite often the best photography is done by the amateurs, the folk that just have an absolute passion for it and give up their spare time and ignore their families. And as much as Oscar did go to the football, the guys that don't go to the football on a Saturday afternoon but go out and photograph and wander the streets. Yeah. And there's a wonderful new generation of Glasgow photographers doing that. There's Chris and Mark Leslie doing their wonderful work. Mark down at the Barras, Chris doing his Vanishing Glasgow. But there's a whole new generation of young photographers who are taking, and it's the usual, if you see a picture of Glasgow taken yesterday, you think, well, that's quite a good picture, but it doesn't take on any resonance until it's got some history. And 20, 30 years from now, we'll be looking at today's photographs thinking, God, why did they demolish that? Or do you remember that? Where was that? Yeah. And that's when the stories start. And it's the great thing about pictures, it's always about the stories. It's always about the stories and what the pictures evoke and what they bring out in people.
That's right. Well, after this is done, this will be history as well. But, history's got a funny way of turning up when you least expect it. But it's interesting that you mentioned Peter Degnan there, because he came in for a visit. I'd never met Peter before because he lives down south in Derbyshire, I think. When we were installing the Oscar Marzaroli exhibition, he did happened to meet Oscar at one particular point, but also he was given some of his voluntary time when street level was being set up. So there's just really interesting connections being made there. So he's published his little photo book, and there's a profile of that on the Document Scotland website. For people watching, if you want to find out about other documentary photographers in Scotland, that is the place. That is the place to go. So, other questions here? Any other questions, folks? Oh yeah. Now here's a difficult one. Michael Smith, what do you think makes Glasgow different from other working class cities?
I could be very flippant and do the old classic. People make Glasgow, but people make any city. I've found warmth and friendship in diverse cities. I think the strange thing is the cities that I've always felt most at home in have almost the same social mix as Glasgow. It's Liverpool, it's Birmingham, it's Manchester. It's cities that weren't really cities before the Industrial Revolution. They were smaller places pre-Industrial Revolution, and then they sucked in people from all the surrounding airts and pairts. And then there's the huge injection of Irish and Italian and then Asian, and that wonderful. I always like to think of every incomer to Glasgow adding a new stripe to Glasgow's tartan, a new colour to our fabric. And the more stripes there are to our tartan, the harder it is for folk to separate us. And it's that wonderful human mix. I talked, I think, in the film about the human clay of Glasgow. The human clay of Glasgow comes in all shades and all colours, and always has done. Folk that think immigration is a new thing in Glasgow don't know their history and should go away and learn it. Because Glasgow has always welcomed incomers. Glasgow is a city of incomers. We're a city of mongrels. And all the stronger for it.
Yeah.
And particularly in a night like this, where the festival of the Eid begins, I would definitely say Eid Mubarak to all my Asian friends, because I know how tough Ramadan is at the best of times, and under lockdown, it's going to be even more difficult for them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jeremy from Document Scotland's just posted to say that tomorrow, Joss Train will be profiled on Document Scotland website. You mentioned him earlier on. Any other questions that we can pick up on here?
As I say, we should probably mention Morton Gillespie again and his exhibition up at Maryhill. As I say, we were all meant to be going to that the weekend the lockdown was announced.
Yeah.
And one of the lovely things, now I've used Morton's photographs many times. I think I met him at the first Lost Glasgow exhibition 2 or 3 years ago, and he started producing photographs out of his bag that just left my jaw on the floor. And we talked at the time about doing something, and it was perhaps only about 4 months ago. He sent me a huge tranche of his 1950s and 60s Glasgow photographs. I put them up in Lost Glasgow and said, look, Morton has never had an exhibition of his Glasgow photography, and would anyone have some wall space? And literally within half an hour, Maryhill Borough Halls contacted both of us and said, we'd love to have Morton's photographs. So as I say, once the lockdown is over, get your sweet tail up to Maryhill Borough Halls, because this is an exhibition of photographs that simply haven't been shown before. And he was working at the same time as Oscar. As I say, I'm amazed they never caught each other in the corner of a frame, because they were prowling the same streets pretty well at the same time, shooting the same things.
Yeah. Well, Matt Sillers in Inverness has messaged as well to say that Morton's exhibition will go to Inverness and be exhibited through the Flow people up there. Great bunch of photographers who organise exhibitions on the Photography Festival.
Brilliant to hear.
Yeah, after Mary Hill, of course. So stay tuned for that. So I think we need to probably bring this to an end to a certain extent. But I mean, one more point here. You know, Lost Glasgow is it's an educational tool, because I was just looking at the website last night. In actual fact, your post regarding light, and it relates to your presentation where you talk about Oscar capturing the magnificent light of the city and of Glasgow. And you have that little post where you talk about two photographs that capture Glasgow at dusk, and it's quite poetic, because you refer to you mentioned that, was there ever a more an evocative word for that magic light than gloaming? I thought, gloaming, I haven't heard that for yonks. So I kind of look it up, and I discover that the meaning of this word, which I should have known many years ago, is that twilight time between day and night. And of course, the music historians amongst us, or the purveyors of Biscuit Tin Caledonia, will know Harry Lauder's song written in 1911, Roaming in the Gloaming. Very popular song. That's exactly right. Which then reminds me of Ricky Ross talking about Oscar's photographs at a recent event that you were at as well, Norry, in terms of saying that Glasgow's the most romantic city in the world. Hence the title of Deacon Blue's new CD, City of Love. Would you agree with that?
As an old romantic, yes. And obviously the fact that we have the bones of St. Valentine down in the Gorbals.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? We're a city of romantics, and it's from that incomer bit. It's the Highlander, it's the Lowlander, it's the Irish, it's the Asian, it's the poetry in our souls.
Yeah.
And most Glasgow men, even if they pretend to be big rough toughies, poke them in the right bit of the memory muscle, and they'll be greeting in their beer, because we're romantic souls. We've got that Caledonian thing going on.
Yeah. And that poetry of the soul is something that you can take anywhere, I do think.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Thank you very much, Norry. This has been absolutely fascinating. I hope that people watching this have enjoyed it also. As I say, we will be uploading this to Facebook, and we'll be able to share this on YouTube also. So all we have to say now is we're going to go out for our 15-minute walk, keeping a safe social distance or physical distance from other people. But just to reiterate, the Marzaroli exhibition will reopen in Trongate 103, and Norry talked about the Alistair Gray exhibition also. That will also reopen at the same time. So everyone will have a chance to visit it. And also do visit Lost Glasgow and join that huge community of people that's embraced within it. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining, and look out for future events. Good night.
Slàinte mhath.